The story begins as two men faced each other. One, a fully armored knight, the other, a savage barbarian. They stand on a battlefield littered with corpses as a fierce blizzard rages around them. The knight demands to know how the barbarian shattered his restraints using nothing but brute strength. But he quickly dismisses the question, realizing it's pointless. The barbarian wouldn't understand him anyway. As the barbarian draws near, he identifies himself, Urich of the Stone Axe tribe. The armored warrior, unsheathing his sword, points out that even a barbarian with Urich's skills should comprehend the notion of honor. Pordgal Arten, the seasoned knight of the Empire, says, introducing himself as he adopts a defensive stance. Urich confirms that he will remember the name and then he charges. Pordgal fully expects to deflect the sword with his shield and deliver a fatal counter. However, Urich catches him completely off guard. Instead of swinging, he hurls his sword as he closes the distance. "You will not win," Urich declares, landing a crushing blow that leaves Pordgal spewing blood. Seizing the opportunity, Urich breaks Pordgal's fingers. In a desperate response, Pordgal shoves Urich with his shield, causing him to stumble and fall. But Urich quickly regains his composure, retrieves his sword just as Pordgal tries to strike, and swiftly slashes the knight's leg. Urich rose to his feet as he delivered the final blow to the knight. Urich thought that Pordgal's skills weren't lacking. He simply chose the wrong opponent. Following the confrontation, Urich rises to his feet and exhales slowly, his breathing steady. He opens his eyes and lies down, gazing up at the night's starry sky. "I'm dizzy," he remarks as the scene fades. Near the village, Urich was being told he will become a legendary warrior of light. He scoffs at the idea, calling the shaman an old hag. He ridicules the very concept of divination, attributing her vision to her being drunk on medicine. But the elderly woman insisted, "I saw a vision, you, a warrior of light." Urich then suggests it's time for her to retire as shaman, which infuriates her. She shouts and hurls a rock at him, warning that even without his words, her time is already drawing to a close. Just as Urich was about to leave, the old lady remarked that if he were to go hunting with the young warriors, the chieftain's son might feel envious. This irritated Urich, and he turned back to assert that he had no interest in competing for the chief position. The old lady pointed out that others saw him as a strong candidate, even if he did not. Urich remained firm in his stance, insisting he had no intention of pursuing it and questioning who would dare make him do it. With that, he gave his farewells and departed. Later, Urich reunited with his companions. As they talked, one of them questioned whether he genuinely planned to ascend the Sky Mountain range that day. A friend warned him of the dangers beyond, a place said to be inhabited by spirits that might prevent his return. In response, Urich mentioned that the chief's son had recently caught a massive wolf. To avoid falling behind, they needed to venture up the mountain to hunt even larger prey. He noted that the adults regularly hunted there and teased his friends, calling them cowards. Provoked by his words, they passionately agreed to join him on the perilous journey. After a long and tiring climb up the mountain, Urich realized despite their efforts they had made little progress up the mountain. He wondered what lay beyond its peaks, contemplating whether the world of the deceased described by the elders truly existed there. As they searched for prey, his friends once again urged him to become their tribe's leader. But suddenly, Urich's attention was broken by a flash of light in the bushes. He quickly ordered his friends to take cover. A moment later, a hail of arrows struck some of his companions. Urich shielded them and instructed the uninjured to return fire. Upon examining one of the arrows, he was struck by its exceptional sharpness and intricate design, unlike anything his tribe could create. Urich looked uphill, scanning the ridgeline. Unbeknownst to him, an armored knight stood further above, silently observing as a group of soldiers unleashed volleys down the mountain. The assault had persisted, with the enemy boasting a longer range and a strategic high ground advantage. Urich, gazing back at his wounded comrades, felt a sense of guilt for suggesting they venture into the mountains. He believed he had to take responsibility for the situation and instructed his friends to retreat down the mountain first, while he held off the enemy. However, one of his friends disputed this plan, insisting that they could not abandon Urich to face the enemy alone. Urich grabbed his friend and told him he was better off without them. He ordered him to descend the mountain before he lost control and crushed his head. Urich also emphasized that dying together had its importance, but saving a brother mattered too. As the friend carried the injured companion and separated, he urged Urich to return alive. Urich reassured him that he would not die, citing the old shaman's prophecy that he would become a great warrior of light. Urich ascended the mountain, but from his position, he was unable to pinpoint the enemy's location. He devised a plan to locate them by hurling his spear and then rushing toward them as swiftly as possible. Urich then emerged from his cover, only to be met with a hail of arrows as he threw his spear. He sprinted towards the attackers, leaping into a nearby bush. As he did, he stumbled upon a group of soldiers clad in unfamiliar attire. Urich inquired of the soldiers if they hailed from the opposite side of the mountain. The soldiers grew uneasy in his presence, deducing that he was no ordinary fighter and thus remained vigilant. Urich, observing the soldiers' conversation, attempted to communicate, though he could not comprehend their language. However, he told them that as soon as they laid a hand on his brothers, their lives were forfeit. At that moment, a deep voice had ordered the soldiers to lower their bows, saying it was fortunate he had worn armor as a precaution, adding that they would capture the barbarian alive. The barbarian would make a fine gift for the emperor to commemorate the discovery of the new land. Urich noticed the knight and had been intrigued by the iron plates covering his body. Just as the knight was about to engage in combat, he nonchalantly dropped his shield, trusting that his armor would protect him from a barbarian's axe. As he took out his sword, he adopted the Empire's blade-grab swordsmanship style, gripping the weapon by its sharpened edge. Urich had been taken aback by the knight's bold action, and his annoyance had grown as he felt belittled by the knight's stance. However, upon noticing the surrounding soldiers, he realized they were attempting to capture him alive, rather than kill him. The knight charged in, grasping his sword, but Urich swiftly throwed his axe at the knight. The axe head became lodged in the knight's visor, yanking off his helmet. The knight had been astonished that a barbarian could accomplish such a feat. Urich sprang into action without hesitation, charging towards Prodigal, who swung his sword in a wild arc. However, Urich had been quick on his feet and dodged the attack with ease. He then seized the opportunity to counterattack, kicking Prodigal with his leg and delivering a crushing blow. Just as Urich was about to deliver the final blow with his axe, the soldiers intervened, firing crossbows at him and then restraining him with ropes. Prodigal had been left stunned by the barbarian's impressive skills. As night fell, the soldiers stirred the captive Urich, who, upon waking, found himself in pain after being struck by the knight. The soldiers then went to the fire, while Urich came to a realization: there indeed existed people from beyond the mountain range. Recognizing that there was a world beyond the sky, Urich understood that it had not been a realm for the souls of the dead. He noticed the biting cold and hypothesized that the tribe's warriors had been unable to cross the mountain due to the harsh climate. Urich suddenly burst into laughter, his voice echoing loudly and drawing attention of the soldiers as he continued to laugh uncontrollably. With a burst of strength, Urich broke free from his restraints. Seeing Urich approach, the soldiers panicked and scattered in terror. With a fearless grin, Urich told them they could boast in the afterlife that the one who killed them was Urich of the Rock Axe tribe. After Urich finished off the last of the soldiers, he gazed upon the formidable peaks of the Sky Mountain range. With one final look at his motherland behind him, he ventured into the unknown world. After many days had passed, in a distant corner of the world, a desperate man fled from thugs. He stumbled and fell, their shadows closing in on him. Just as he pleaded for mercy, a mysterious stranger appeared, capturing everyone's attention. The terrified man screamed for the stranger to help him. It was Urich, now fully clothed and carrying a sword. The lead thug approached him, telling him to get lost. In response, Urich spoke in his tribal tongue, a language they could not possibly understand, and indicated that he was merely curious about what they were doing. The men, hearing the foreign language for the first time, dismissed him as some bumpkin from the south. The thug threatened Urich, brandishing a knife to punctuate his demand. Urich simply observed him, let out a sigh, and then, with shocking speed, twisted the man's head, snapping his neck. The remaining thugs stared in horror at their dead friend. "You started this," Urich told them, though they could not comprehend his words. Fueled by rage, the thugs launched themselves at him with their weapons drawn, but their aggression was futile. Urich dispatched them with expert ease, twisting and breaking their necks one by one. The man he saved could only watch, completely stunned by the brutal display of skill. Urich then approached the man, drew a symbol in the ground, and wordlessly asked to be taken to the nearest settlement. The man led Urich to the nearby city of Ankara. Seeing it from afar, Urich was amazed by what he saw. The man explained that Ankara was a bustling city where most people made their living from the copper mine. As they entered, Urich was completely taken aback by its sheer size and the throngs of people. He gawked at his surroundings, and the man, observing his naivety, realized Urich knew very little of the modern world. That night, the man took Urich to a tavern. He asked around if anybody could speak Urich's language, but no one could. They guessed from his appearance that he must be a northerner, deducing that if he could not speak the Empire's language, he must be from the distant countryside. Urich overheard this and realized that if they were to learn he was from beyond the Sky Mountain range, their attitudes might change drastically. Consequently, he decided to conceal his true origins. The man stated they could find an interpreter later, but offered to buy him a drink for now. Urich observed the coins used for payment. He knew producing them would require delicate workmanship, but the concept itself was foreign. It was a stark contrast to the bartering of dried meats and leather his tribe practiced. He was witnessing currency for the first time. Suddenly, Urich's eyes fixated on an axe hanging from another customer's back. He immediately recognized that the weapons here were far superior to his own, a clear sign of their more developed iron craftsmanship. He turned to the man and slowly spelled out the word axe, asking how he could acquire one. The man understood. He drew an axe and then pointed to the coins, showing Urich that he needed money to buy the weapon. A sinister thought formed in the man's mind. Urich was strong and a gifted fighter, but he was also a penniless outcast. If he played his cards right, he could take advantage of this powerful fool. As Urich contemplated how to get the round things, the man asked him, hesitantly, if he wanted to make some money. The scene shifted. The man's suggestion was for Urich to fight in the Ankara arena. The shady man using drawings, he desperately tried to explain the most important rule. Killing was forbidden. As Urich stepped into the fighting pit, he observed the men around him and thought they were all weaker than himself. The judge signaled the start of the fight. Urich's opponent threw a flurry of punches, but none connected. He calmly caught his opponent's hand, twisted it to leave him defenseless, and drove a single knee into his torso. The man crumpled to the ground. Urich thought with disdain that this wasn't a place where they fought with their lives on the line. There were no real warriors there. The crowd was stunned into silence. Their champion had been defeated with a single hit. At that moment, Urich recalled Prodigal, the man who had crossed swords with him, a real warrior who was prepared for death. A small smile touched his lips as he hoped that someday, in this new world, he might meet another strong person. After days of doing nothing, Urich was completely drunk by morning. His shady friend woke him up, reminding him they had wasted months and racked up too much debt at the tavern. They couldn't afford to loaf around, much less buy Urich a new axe. Shaking off his drunkenness, Urich heard his shady friend tell him to go. Everyone was waiting for him. Complaining that his shady friend was yapping so early, Urich left the room, not bothering to understand. In the fighting arena, the crowd chanted Urich's name. His shady friend smirked, thinking about his undefeated moneymaker. Urich, however, found his opponent to be incredibly weak. He wondered if he should end the fight with a single hit to the jaw. He calmly started the fight, and the opponent swung a punch. This time the attack connected, hitting Urich in the stomach. He was sure he had dodged it. The opponent continued with a barrage of punches, putting Urich on the defensive. Urich contemplated how rusty his body had become, but his anger flared at the thought of his own weakness. With that rage, Urich threw a devastating punch that connected straight with his opponent's face, knocking out his teeth. The punch was so powerful that the opponent died on the spot. The fight organizer became furious and told them to get out of the arena and never show up again. Back at the tavern, the shady friend left Urich, saying he would find other ways to make money. Standing outside Urich's room, the shady friend contemplated that they couldn't earn money in Ankara anymore, thinking it was time to wrap things up with Urich. Meanwhile, Urich sat down, gazing at the ground quietly. He clenched his fist, thinking he couldn't even control the strength of a simple hit. He wondered if this was why he had descended the mountain, to become a drunken warrior. He then saw Prodigal's sword. He thought about the time he and Portugal fought with their lives on the line in the Sky Mountain range as a blizzard raged around them. He picked up the sword, looking at it as he thought that there were no excuses or justifications. The survivor was righteous. This was the reason he had turned his back on his homeland and came here. Urich started to practice sword moves, thinking he was about to see things he didn't know existed. He put the sword closer to his face, thinking the days he spent in Ankara definitely felt like his final rest. But looking at his reflection on the sword, he resolved that a warrior should rest after they die, not while they still draw breath. The next day, his shady friend took Urich, saying he had gotten a big one this time. Urich thanked him, acknowledging that it was because of him he had grown accustomed to this place. They entered a building, and Urich noticed there was no audience. He saw some people on the top floor looking down. Urich grasped his sword and immediately readied himself. One of the men upstairs saw Urich's reaction and praised him, saying he had plenty of fighting experience and that it was obvious he was worth buying. The shady friend then told the man there was no need to whisper since Urich couldn't speak the imperial language. The guy responded that he would take that into consideration when he bought him, but the shady friend replied that such things were unnecessary for warriors and told him to take a look at his fighting skills. Urich was given a wooden sword to show his skills, and another man with a wooden sword approached him. Urich examined the hollow wooden sword and understood it was to test him. The approaching man told Urich he must be a newcomer slave gladiator and that he would teach him a lot. The shady friend smirked, thinking about how much money he was going to make. The opponent attacked Urich, but Urich swiftly defended, then moved to the side while the opponent was mid-motion. He took the opponent's sword as the man stood in shock, unable to grasp what had just happened. Without a word, Urich handed the weapon back, let his own sword fall to the ground, and signaled for him to come at him. The opponent, enraged, lunged at Urich, but again, Urich dodged and took his sword. Urich threw down the sword and said he would like to stop with these childish games since he had held a weapon with an edge ever since he was 5. The man who was upstairs told them to stop, saying he didn't need to see anymore. The demonstration was enough. The shady friend and the man began to negotiate the money. Urich started to get suspicious, seeing his shady friend receiving money. He observed 2 armed warriors while his shady friend collected the payment. Urich then put one and one together, dashing toward his shady friend and taking a sword from one of the guards. He cut the shady friend's hand that was holding the money. The buyer, seeing this, stopped his guards from taking action. Urich then dragged the shady thug and spoke in the Imperial language, saying that if the shady friend opened his mouth, Urich would cut out his tongue. The shady guy was shocked to hear Urich speak the Imperial language and began to beg for his life. Urich told him to speak nice and slow, as he couldn't hear him well if he spoke fast. Urich then killed the thug. The buyer was horrified by the scene. Urich nonchalantly went back, gave the sword to the guard, and complimented its sharp blade. The buyer was scared by Urich's demeanor and decided he was not a beast they could tame. He instructed his guards to leave, mentioning that there had been a misunderstanding between them. Urich, however, sat in a chair and told them to stay where they were so they could continue negotiating with him. Urich specified that they needed a gladiator, showing interest in a proposal. After some discussion, the buyer told him that a free gladiator takes half of each match's earnings, and in exchange they would handle his food and board. Urich asked about the Imperial language, but the buyer informed Urich, as that thug had said, that there was no need for such things for a warrior. Both began to laugh together. The buyer then introduced himself as Horus, a slave merchant and gladiator middleman. They concluded the negotiation, and Horus welcomed Urich to the Horus gladiator troupe. At the gladiator camp, Urich was approached by a fellow gladiator who questioned what he was doing near the slaves. He speculated that Urich might be a northerner looking for one of his kin. Urich responded that he had no relation to the north and explained his poor grasp of the Empire's language by claiming he had lived in foreign lands. The gladiator had assumed Urich was a northerner based on his large build. Urich then asked whether all northerners were slaves. The gladiator replied that not all of them were, but some had been enslaved during the northern expedition, which had lasted nearly 10 years. Urich pointed out a towering man with a formidable build and asked if he was a northerner. The gladiator affirmed that Urich had sharp eyes, as he had spotted the only northerner in their gladiator troupe. A group gladiators approached them, and their leader introduced the large man as Sven, a slave gladiator who had survived there for over 3 years. He then referred to Urich as newcomer. Urich corrected him, telling him that his name was Urich. The gladiator grew slightly annoyed and introduced himself as Donovan, the main attraction of the gladiator troupe. As Urich calmly walked away, Donovan remarked that he could smell Urich was a barbarian. This irritated Urich. He stopped, glanced at Donovan, and questioned what kind of smell he meant. Donovan elaborated, saying it was the scent of a beast trying to pose as a human, an animal that only appeared human on the outside. In response, Urich sarcastically noted that if Donovan could smell that well, he must be a dog. Donovan retorted that during the barbarian subjugation, he had met many like Urich, and claimed that no amount of civilization could wash away the stench of the tribes. Mocking Donovan, Urich impersonated him, pretending to introduce himself as Urich the Barbarian. He then reflected aloud on why people in the Empire insulted others so freely. He figured it was because their tongues would not be cut off, no matter what they said, and their heads would stay attached. As long as their tongues remained intact, they could continue spewing nonsense. Before the tension escalated further, Horus intervened and stopped the confrontation, reminding them that they were not allowed to die before repaying him. Annoyed, Donovan left with his companions. The long-awaited day arrived. Urich would face his first opponent in the gladiator arena. He was mildly offended to learn that his life had been valued at only 800,000 coins. Sven then asked whether Urich would wear a chest plate and helmet. Urich declined, stating that such gear would only weigh him down. Sven introduced himself and asked how Urich had acquired a sword forged from Imperial steel, a rare metal monopolized by the Imperial family. Stronger than regular iron, it was commonly referred to as steel and was exclusively used by the Empire's knights. Such weapons were rarely seen by commoners. Urich began to wonder if Prodigal had been an Imperial knight. Donovan scoffed, implying the sword was fake, since not just anyone could possess such a weapon. Soon after, Sven and Urich entered the arena. Because the Empire's citizens rarely experienced war firsthand, they craved bloodshed and grew excited as the match began. Urich and Sven approached their respective opponents and wished each other luck. Urich's opponent was shocked to see him armed with only a single sword, assuming he must have been overconfident. Urich bounced lightly on his toes, evaluating his opponent's solid defense. Then in a sudden burst, he charged forward and leaped over the man, catching him off guard. He stabbed him from above and noted to himself that heavy armor only slowed the body and dulled reaction time. After dispatching his foe, Urich asked Sven if he needed help. Sven stood idly, leaving himself wide open, as if inviting his enemies to strike. Urich thought to himself, no matter how fast a two-handed battle axe was, a one-handed sword was far quicker. Sven laughed as his opponent charged, but his axe struck first, landing a devastating blow. Though the move had seemed sound in theory, Sven's swing proved superior. The sheer force of his strike overwhelmed the opponent. His logic had been solid, but Sven's strength was simply too much. As Sven exited the arena, he remarked that it seemed he had survived another day, and that his journey to the Hill of Swords was still far from over. Urich was left wondering how someone with such skill could remain a slave. Later at a tavern, Urich inquired about Sven. The gladiator from earlier explained that Sven was somewhat special. If he wished, Horus would gladly negotiate to make him a free gladiator. However, Sven chose to remain a slave out of loyalty. Horus had rescued him when he was stranded at sea and near death. Since Horus had treated him well and provided a place to fight, Sven, as a northerner, felt that was enough to earn his allegiance. Urich asked about the meaning behind a northerner's perspective. The gladiator described the Hill of Swords, a sacred place where their great ancestors and warriors awaited them. It was a warrior's paradise where they could eat meat, drink alcohol, and test their strength endlessly. Northerners feared dying of disease or in accidents because only those who died in battle were believed worthy of entering the Hill of Swords. For Urich, the Hill of Swords was similar to the stories he had heard in his homeland. The elders believed that beyond the mountain range lay a world of souls, but he had come to understand that the world beyond the mountains was also a land of the living. He began to ponder where souls truly went after death and what might happen to him when his time came. He asked the gladiator where someone like him, a civilized man, would go when he died. In response, the gladiator held up his necklace of the sun and explained that his soul would return to Ru, the sun god, and be reborn. Within the empire, it was safe to say that all citizens were believers. Every kingdom under the empire's rule had adopted Sol as their national religion. Urich remarked that he believed in the sky. Since the sun was part of the sky, what he believed in must be even greater. Lost in thought, he returned to contemplating the mysteries of life and death, until the gladiator beside him finally broke the silence and introduced himself as Bachman. In Urich's room, Bachman asked if Urich had grasped the full picture of what was happening among the gladiators, particularly the Donovan faction and the additional drifters in the troop. Out of the 21 gladiators, 10 belonged to Donovan's side. Donovan, once a soldier by his own claim, said he had served under Blademaster Purgen. Whether or not that was true, he had become the most renowned gladiator in Horus's troop, so it wasn't surprising that he had formed his own clique. However, the real issue lay in Donovan's control over the match listings. His faction conveniently received all the easy and profitable matches, while the remaining gladiators were left with the dangerous and grueling ones. Although the others technically had the right to refuse, doing so repeatedly would only lead to starvation. Bachman explained that if a new gladiator were to rise to Donovan's level of influence, Donovan would no longer be able to manipulate the match list at will. Urich responded by asking why Bachman didn't become that gladiator himself if he despised Donovan so much. Bachman admitted that he wished he could, but his skills simply weren't up to par. With that, he placed his expectations on Urich, asking him to take the role of standout gladiator. Upon hearing this, Urich expressed his dislike for those who manipulated others into doing what they couldn't do themselves. Yet he acknowledged that it was the law of nature. A fox would always enlist a lion's help to hunt a wolf. Nothing could be done about it. Placing a hand on Bachman's shoulder, Urich added that he didn't resent this aspect of him. Since stepping into the so-called civilized world, Bachman had been the first to approach and treat him kindly. Kindness, he believed, must be repaid in full. With that understanding between them, the two began planning their next steps. Meanwhile, in Horus's office, Donovan and Horus were discussing the upcoming matches and lineups. Horus noted that Donovan's match would be the final one, and his opponents would be slave gladiators. During their conversation, Urich entered and declared his intent to take the final match. He promised to spill enough blood to leave the spectators fainting. Donovan, irritated by the interruption, snapped at Urich, dismissing him as a nameless gladiator meddling with the match list and threatening him to back off or face death. Urich ignored Donovan and directed his request to Horus, asking to be placed in the final match instead. Donovan objected loudly, calling the proposal outrageous. Horus reminded Urich that the final match was the most important one of the day and demanded a justification. Urich raised his hand and declared that he would face 5 opponents, whether inmates or gladiators. He assured them that even curiosity alone would draw a crowd. Horus protested, warning that if Urich died in a pitiful manner, it would tarnish the troop's reputation. Urich reassured him of his victory. He had never lost a fight, be it against 5 or even 10 opponents. While Horus emphasized the vast difference between fighting in the arena and surviving an ambush, Donovan unexpectedly allowed Urich to take his place in the final 5v1 battle. Urich responded with a sarcastic thanks and continued to flatter Horus until he reluctantly agreed. The day of the match arrived, and anticipation buzzed among the crowd. Spectators hoped for a thrilling contest rather than a dull, one-sided beating. In the preparation room, where the warriors gathered before their matches, Urich was busy preparing something. As he worked, someone spoke of a lake as wide as the sky, ever flowing with no visible end. Yurich raised his voice, frustration boiling over. Yurich assumed they were mocking his ignorance, as he had never seen the ocean before. Bachman entered, visibly anxious. The idea of Yurich taking on 5 opponents alone seemed suicidal to him. He pleaded with Yurich to cancel the match, feeling personally responsible for putting him in such danger. Yurich responded with a quiet intensity, stating that Bachman couldn't begin to comprehend who he truly was or where he came from. Though his overflowing confidence was impressive, Bachman urged him to recognize the line between bravery and recklessness. Yurich countered, insisting that one could never know unless they tried. Bachman argued back, saying that the outcome was already obvious and didn't need to be tested. He pointed to the barbarians of the north, who had resisted the empire for a decade only to be defeated in the end. In contrast, the southern barbarians had surrendered within a year and were now prosperous and civilized. The result, he said, had been decided from the start. Despite the warning, Yurich remained composed. He reassured Bachman and resumed grinding the substance he had been working on, eventually smearing it across his face. He knew all too well the cost of fighting 5 opponents alone. Death was a real possibility, but he had no intention of dying just yet. As he painted his face, the atmosphere in the room shifted. His time had come. When Yurich rose to leave, Horus and the others felt a palpable force emanating from him, an overwhelming presence that silenced the room. Yurich was ready to step into the arena. A noble asked Horus with a concern about the final match, pointing out that many spectators would be disappointed if it didn't turn out to be entertaining. Horus reassured him that, regardless of the outcome, the match would be worth watching. The noble expressed his anticipation, and Horus reflected silently that his instincts had not failed him. He had a knack for placing bets like this. When Yurich stepped into the arena, the crowd was stunned by the markings on his face. His appearance was monstrous. He stood ready as the criminals were released. The fighters appeared relaxed, convinced that the match would be simple. Their incentive was clear. If all 5 managed to kill Yurich, their sentences would be reduced. Sven, judging by how they held their weapons, assumed they were criminals who had volunteered for combat to earn leniency. Most seemed to have combat experience. Donovan, observing the scene, smirked and thought that Yurich was in serious trouble now. While the criminals didn't show signs of coordinated training, their individual forms were decent. Their strength was in their numbers, and none of them seemed eager to initiate the fight. Seeing the standoff, Yurich chose to strike first. He advanced on them. One fighter attempted to block his attack, but Yurich trusted in the strength of his blade. It shattered the shield and cut directly through the opponent. Yurich admired his sword. It was made of excellent steel. The remaining fighters rushed in, attempting to overwhelm him, but Yurich evaded and defended their attacks with precision. Creating some distance, he pulled out his axe and hurled it at one of them. It struck the target's neck and lodged there. A nearby fighter was visibly shaken by the sight of his comrade's death. Yurich took advantage of the opening and finished the wounded man with his sword. The blade held up under the pressure. Any ordinary sword would have bent or dulled by now. Watching this, Donovan considered that Yurich's weapon might be an imperial steel sword. If they tried the same with their weapons, they would have broken. He wondered how a barbarian had come into possession of such a sword, especially one without noble status. Yurich continued to dominate the field. His overwhelming presence froze his enemies in fear. He was in control, doing as he pleased. His approach wasn't reckless. It came from experience and confidence in handling multiple opponents. Charging the remaining 3, Yurich leapt high and brought his sword down, severing the hands of one of the fighters. Now only 2 were left. Though they wielded weapons, they seemed like street thugs, clearly outmatched by a true warrior. Yurich taunted them, provoking them to attack. Enraged, they rushed him together. He looked on, disappointed, feeling no need to brace himself further. The fight wasn't testing his limits. He struck one down, then threw his axe at the last, the weapon landing squarely in the fighter's head. The arena floor was soaked with blood. The audience erupted in celebration over Yurich's victory. After the battle, Bachman and the other gladiators praised the fight. As Yurich wiped away the blood and cleaned his face, the others gradually left the area, leaving him alone with Donovan. Donovan approached, and Yurich remarked that he had become the troop's main attraction. With a serious expression, Donovan offered his hand in congratulations for becoming the rising star of Horus's gladiators. Yurich accepted, and the 2 shook hands firmly. In the Sky Mountain range, Yurich revealed a stretch of fertile land to his friends. Though skeptical at first, they slowly began to believe that starvation might no longer be their fate. Watching them enjoy the moment, Yurich felt peace, until Bachman's voice pulled him from the dream. The troop leader was calling for him, likely regarding the match list. When Yurich entered the room, Horus greeted him. Donovan was already present, and the discussion about the upcoming matches began. 5 matches had been assigned to them, but one stood out. It was against a champion. Donovan immediately proposed sacrificing a slave for that fight, suggesting they simply throw it away. Yurich, confused by the suggestion, questioned why they wouldn't just aim to win. Donovan explained that the champion belonged to a noble, and it was better to send someone who they wouldn't mind dying. Horus supported this view, pointing out that this was precisely why they kept slave gladiators. Next on the list was a 3-on-3 pride match between two gladiator troops. Horus liked the idea of pairing Donovan and Urich together. The two glanced at each other and, without hesitation, voiced their refusal in unison. Since they both rejected the idea, Horus gave the role to Urich, asking him to choose 2 companions for the fight. The reward was 1.5 million coins per person. Donovan protested the decision, but Horus reminded him that he had been given his way in the last match, and now it was Urich's turn. Urich proposed a change. He would pick 1 slave, and the other 2 participants would receive 2 million coins each instead. Horus asked who the slave would be. Urich chose Sven. With that adjustment, Horus lowered the payout slightly, offering 1.8 million coins for each of the other 2. Urich accepted, selecting himself, Sven, and Backman for the match. As the conversation ended, Urich observed how the Civilized used letters to record their history instead of oral storytelling. He thought that by learning their letters, he might understand their world better. Before the match, Urich asked Sven why he remained a slave. Sven explained that his spirit had long been bound to the world of the living, but since Horus had granted him the chance to fight, all he wished for now was to fall in battle with honor and ascend to the Hill of Swords. He had no remaining desires, only the hope of a warrior's death. Urich then asked about his homeland and his family. Sven's expression darkened. The war against the Empire had taken everything from him: his home, his family, his future. His clan had planned to migrate eastward. He and the other men had families to protect, wives and children relying on them. Curious, Urich asked about the East. Sven spoke of a legend. Beyond the eastern sea lay another land. Their ancestors were said to have once reached it and returned. According to the tales, people with black hair and black eyes lived there. Both Urich and Backman were taken aback by the story. They began a joke that Sven must have been shipwrecked and captured, ending up as a slave. Backman teased that the eastern sea led only to a cliff, that Sven would have fallen to his death at the world's edge. The two argued playfully, neither willing to back down. Eventually, it was time for their match. As the trio walked toward the arena, Urich's thoughts lingered on the idea of the world's edge. Was there truly something beyond the sea? The only way to know was to go see it for himself. They stepped into the arena. Urich looked up at the sky, reflecting on how vast the world truly was, so much left unseen. Their opponents charged forward. Urich continued his thoughts. He wouldn't die, not yet, not until he had uncovered the mysteries of the world. With that resolve, he smiled as Sven and Backman charged ahead into battle. Urich was celebrating his victory alongside the other gladiators at a feast hosted by a noble. The noble warmly received Horus, expressing that the people were enamored with his gladiator. Horus responded with a humble thanks. The noble's son, Trios, interrupted the moment, eager to shift attention. He remarked that his own champion was also highly skilled with axe and wanted to demonstrate that talent. He confidently claimed that he would find greater satisfaction in his champion's skill than in that of a common gladiator. Calling for his champion, Mogdi, Trios boasted that there was no way the great Trios' gladiator would fail where a mere commoner had succeeded. The champion, however, hesitated. In his mind, Urich's skill far surpassed his own, and he knew there was no way he could match it. But the noble issued a threat, pressuring the champion not to disgrace him. Caught in a bind, the champion resolved to throw the match. When a noble gave an order, obedience was expected, regardless of the champion's abilities. A servant was chosen to participate in the demonstration, an apple trembling on his head. The throw missed. The axe struck the servant's shoulder, and the apple rolled across the floor, stopping at Urich's feet. Urich picked it up and silently stared at Trios, who now stood in humiliation. Horus, sensing trouble, feared being caught in the fallout, knowing full well how difficult the young noble could be. He quickly approached Backman and Urich, instructing them to leave the event. Though reluctant, they complied. Days later, Urich found himself in the stands, watching the same champion thrown into the arena to face two lions. He couldn't believe the noble had discarded him over a single failed axe throw. Gladiators could be replaced after all. The man's condition was visibly poor, his injuries apparent. The noble must have been truly furious. Observing his movements, Urich noted that the man's left arm appeared broken and his leg possibly fractured. Backman was shocked into silence. The match began, and the lions quickly overpowered and devoured the champion. Backman then mentioned the next match was Donovan. While Donovan was cruel, he always fought according to the rules. He avoided risky moves, preferring to suffocate his opponents gradually like a snake before killing them. They decided to leave without staying for the match. Several days later, the gladiator troop was on the move. As they traveled, Urich spoke with the troop leader. Horus asked him about his origins. Urich responded vaguely, as if he had simply fallen from the sky. In his 10 years managing the troop, Horus had met many gladiators, yet Urich stood out. Though he couldn't define it exactly, he sensed that Urich was different, someone not destined to remain just another fighter under his watch. Urich accepted the remark with humility. He admitted that, despite being a barbarian with little knowledge of the world, he had come to enjoy life in the troop. Horus pointed out that in only 3 months, Urich had reached the same standing as Donovan. Urich then confessed a desire to own land here. Horus, surprised, explained that with enough money, land could be bought somewhere in the countryside. Gazing at his necklace, Horus silently offered a prayer to the sun god Ru, wishing that it would be all right to keep this barbarian by his side. Suddenly, Urich asked Horus to teach him how to read and write. Horus replied that such things couldn't be learned in a day. Urich remained persistent. Eventually, Horus agreed when Urich proposed giving 10% more of his earnings in exchange. Horus instructed him to find him after dinner, and they would begin by learning to write his name. After finishing his meal, Urich made his way to Horus. On the path, he noticed a rustle in the bushes near the forest, but he dismissed it as nothing significant. Entering the troop leader's tent, he joined Horus, and the two began drawing letters on the ground with sticks. For Urich, it would be fortunate if he could memorize the letters that night and learn to write his own name. As they practiced, Horus eventually inquired whether Urich had ever learned to read before. Urich confirmed he hadn't. Still, he managed to commit the letters to memory after only a few repetitions. He then spelled his name on the ground, remarking that he would likely master it quickly since it didn't seem too difficult. Horus, taken aback by Urich's rapid progress, marveled at how he had written his name in just a few hours. While he had heard that barbarians could learn to read unusually fast, Urich's ability stood out as especially remarkable. While their study continued, an arrow struck one of the guards outside straight in the head. The camp had fallen under attack. Chaos erupted as everyone awakened and scrambled for weapons. Urich and Horus rushed out of their tent. Urich immediately pushed Horus aside, urging him to hide. Once they reached cover, Urich scanned the darkness but couldn't pinpoint the enemy positions. His eyes, still adjusted to the light, struggled to perceive the attackers hidden in the night. He needed to allow his eyes to acclimate to the dark gradually. Horus's safety remained Urich's top priority. Without him, the Gladiator troops' leadership would collapse. But just as Urich turned to him, he saw it, an arrow already lodged in Horus's neck. Blood poured from the deep wound, and Urich quickly assessed it, realizing there was nothing that could be done. He leaned close to Horus and urged him to listen carefully. He told him death was near and advised him to pray to his god and prepare for what was coming. Then he offered a final comfort that those who believed in Horus's god would reincarnate and that they would meet again in the world of the living. Urich reassured him that he had nothing to fear. He spoke of the place he came from, the Sky Mountain Range, and mentioned that others like him lived there. As Horus's strength faded, Urich made a solemn vow. Swearing to the skies in his name, Urich of the Stone Axe tribe promised that those responsible for the attack would not live to see another day. With that assurance, Horus passed away. Grief-stricken, Urich gently closed his eyes, then picking his axe turned toward the battlefield, ready to fulfill his promise. Donovan and the other gladiators had been locked in fierce combat against the attackers. Leading his men with determination, Donovan gathered a select group while sending the rest to the opposite flank, aiming to scatter the enemies, focus, and divide their forces. As his small team advanced toward the adversaries, Donovan was acutely aware that the enemy's numbers remained unknown, a significant disadvantage. Though retreat was an option, it was out of the question. They could not simply flee after enduring such a brutal confrontation. He silently directed one of his comrades to prepare to hurl his spear, planning to close in once the enemy's arrows ceased raining down. The limited volley suggested the attackers were not too numerous. If they had been, they would have already encircled Donovan's group, forcing a desperate close-quarters brawl. When the signal came, the spears flew, and the gladiators charged forward, engaging the foes head-on with fierce resolve. Donovan speculated that the attackers might be thieves or mercenaries, knowing all too well that mercenaries often disguised themselves as common thieves. Amidst the chaos of battle, his eyes caught sight of the young noble trios, commanding the assault with ruthless orders to eliminate every gladiator in sight. Capturing the noble would have been an advantageous hostage situation, but Trios refused to expose himself. Meanwhile, the cowards among the slaves and less brave gladiators had fled, abandoning the fight. Suddenly, a distant scream pierced the battle's din, an anguished cry from those caught under Urich's deadly wrath. Urich had become a terrifying force on the battlefield, cutting down enemies with relentless efficiency. Donovan commanded Urich to capture Trios, identifying him as the same noble they had encountered earlier in the hall. Urich bristled at Donovan's orders, protesting loudly before hurling his axe toward him. The axe struck down an enemy behind Donovan, a grim reminder of Urich's volatile nature. With a harsh curse, Urich warned Donovan to watch his back before taking charge once more, advancing through the flames and slaughtering foes with brutal precision. Breaking through their defenses, he seized Trios and assaulted him barehanded. The sight of their leader captured shattered the attackers' morale, causing them to drop their weapons and surrender. Once the enemies were rounded up and securely restrained, the noble Trios pleaded desperately for his life, invoking his status and offering to pay handsomely for mercy. Donovan suggested they accept the money, a proposal that Bachmann supported. Even in self-defense, harming a noble would bring trouble upon the Gladiator team. As the others debated, Urich approached Trio silently, his expression grim. He declared that the Gladiator team was disbanded, Horus was dead, and that he had vowed to avenge him. Without delay, Urich picked up Trios, then ended Trios' life by driving his sword through the noble's body. Witnessing this, the remaining captives begged for mercy, promising silence and obedience, but the gladiators refused their pleas. They knew the root of the trouble must be destroyed completely. The fallen were gathered and burned, erasing the violent memories from the ground. Following the funeral rites, the survivors gathered to pray to their sun god, Lu. It was believed that the souls of the departed traveled to the sun for purification before returning to the world to be reborn. Urich pondered whether Horus might be reborn somewhere else. Horus had always comforted his dying comrades with promises that they would meet again in the world of souls beyond the mountains. Yet now, Urich felt the heavy emptiness of their souls' absence. They were nowhere to be found. As the funeral ended, the gladiators convened to discuss their uncertain future. With Horus gone, their identity as gladiators was effectively lost. Some considered pooling their money and parting ways, but many had not earned enough even to return home, and several remained wounded. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Urich contemplated a new path, perhaps becoming a mercenary. On a bright, sunlit day, Urich and the others found themselves gathered in a sprawling field, the warmth of the sun contrasting with the tension hanging in the air. Urich voiced his frustration, weary of waiting for 4 long days without any progress. Bachmann responded grimly, acknowledging that their small, nameless mercenary band was unlikely to be hired anytime soon. With no income coming in and a team of 21 men where none seemed to have the wit for proper bookkeeping, their finances were in disarray. The absence of Horus weighed heavily on them all, felt deeply in their bones. Seeking reassurance, Urich turned to one of the gladiators to confirm the accuracy of the intelligence they had received. The man confidently asserted that the information was reliable, adding that if it had been false, they would have already dealt with the bearer swiftly. The looming conflict between Earl de Gelton and Earl Melando was expected to ignite soon, and this very field was poised to be the battleground for their territorial dispute. It was the only open space suitable for such a confrontation, especially with military forces involved. The group had already endured 4 days of waiting in this uncertain limbo. If the job ultimately fell through, Urich knew many would abandon the band, or the leadership might shift to Donovan. Bachmann speculated that Donovan's acceptance of the mercenary role was motivated by ambition. He likely sought to unseat Urich and claim leadership for himself. Donovan's natural skill in commanding men made him a strong contender for the position, perhaps even more suited to it than Urich. Bachmann also wondered why Donovan had chosen this mercenary path instead of remaining in the army, where the life of an imperial soldier was far superior to that of a gladiator. After some time passed, the scout returned with news. The armies had arrived. As the group prepared to eat, the sight of the approaching forces caused everyone to abandon their food and ready themselves for the task ahead. The banners of the opposing armies were unmistakable, the red bear representing Earl de Gelton and the golden trident symbolizing Earl Melando, each commanding roughly 100 men. The mercenaries braced themselves and set off toward the impending battle. On horseback, Melando's noble voiced disdain at de Gelton's sudden claim on his grandfather's lands. The farms on the outskirts had been under their family's control for 2 generations, but the official records, which would have proven the purchase, were likely lost. This meant the land was still, on paper, part of de Gelton's territory, giving him a legitimate reason to press his claim. The noble could only defer the final decision to Rue, acknowledging that both estates were similar in size and population, making de Gelton's situation comparable to their own. A soldier alerted the lord to the approach of a visitor. The noble greeted the man and inquired whether he was an envoy from the earl. The man explained that he belonged to a mercenary group stationed nearby. When questioned about their size, he confirmed there were 22 of them, veteran soldiers, fully armed and experienced. The soldier beside the lord remarked that quality mercenaries were second only to a standing army, and that 22 well-trained fighters could indeed turn the tide of battle. Curious but cautious, the lord asked why he should trust these mercenaries who had arrived so close to the fighting. The envoy replied that if the earl refused to employ them, they would simply work for de Gelton, likely under the same conditions. Within their group, a heated discussion unfolded over which lord to support. Earl Melando had offered a payment of 1 million coins per mercenary, plus a share of the loot and first pick of spoils. Earl de Gelton, on the other hand, offered 2 million coins per person and promised even more depending on their contribution. As they weighed the offers, the lure of de Gelton's higher pay tempted many. They reasoned that they could claim the loot regardless, making the division of spoils a minor concern. Sven interrupted, voicing strong opposition to siding with de Gelton. He argued that de Gelton likely would never pay the promised 2 million coins, While the sum was not impossible for an earl with a small territory to muster, Sven doubted he would risk so much on a nameless mercenary band. Djelten's promise to increase pay depending on contribution seemed more like a tactic to avoid upfront costs. Meanwhile, Melando's offer was tangible, 22 million coins in cash. Sven warned that Djelten would likely stall payment until the opportunity disappeared, or might even order the mercenaries killed after the battle. Djelten's role in starting the conflict marked him as an ambitious, perhaps dangerous noble. Urich found Sven's reasoning convincing and called for a vote. The group unanimously sided with Sven's caution, ultimately deciding to fight for Earl Melando. In the depths of his base, Earl Djelten fumed with frustration. His thoughts burned with disdain as he imagined that stupid Melando bastard, believing a few hired swords could shift the tide of battle. What Melando couldn't have known, what even Djelten hadn't expected, was that his own estranged half-brother had become the captain of the renowned Silver Lion mercenaries. The surprise lingered even as Djelten relished the strategic advantage. Because of that connection, they had managed to bring in 20 heavily armored soldiers, professional fighters, not untrained farmers masquerading as soldiers like most of Melando's forces. Even with the mercenaries Melando had scraped together, they couldn't compare to the 50 heavy armored warriors under Djelten's command. The Silver Lion mercenaries were well known throughout the region, and it was almost laughable to think that the bastard brother who had disappeared 10 years ago had risen to lead them. As arrows began to fly, a woman by Djelten's side urgently begged him to step back, urging caution. Mounting his horse, Djelten offered her the farmland for which this entire battle was being waged. Whether he truly meant those words, even he couldn't tell. The odds favored Djelten on paper. He held twice the number of armored troops, and Melando's side had already lost in the reconnaissance skirmish. Without those mercenaries, Melando would have faced an outright rout. Still, most of Melando's hired men wore light armor. Seasoned though they might have been, their protection was meager. The troop numbers may have seemed evenly matched, but Melando's side faced a stark disadvantage in durability and defense. Battle erupted between the two sides with thunderous ferocity. Urich and his mercenaries clashed with the enemy line, fighting with ruthless intensity. Amid the roar of steel, Sven cried out the name of the Hill of Swords, his voice cutting through the chaos. Urich, hearing the call, was struck by the invocation. Sven feared no death. He held a firm belief that should he fall, his soul would ascend to the Hill of Swords. Inspired, the rest of the mercenaries fell in line behind him under Donovan's command. Sven spearheaded the charge, tearing through the enemy formation like a blade through silk. Their coordinated onslaught cracked Djelten's defensive lines. As the formation buckled, Urich observed the movement of a distinct force, Djelten's elite heavy infantry. He recognized them immediately. These were not ordinary soldiers. These men fought like death itself lingered at their backs, refusing to fall unless their necks were cleanly severed. He met one of them in the fray and ensured the kill was swift, slicing the soldier's head clean from his shoulders. A sudden movement behind him alerted Urich. An arrow sliced through the air toward his back, but with a slight tilt of his head, he evaded it. The knight who loosed the arrow stood stunned. It was as if Urich had an eye on the back of his head. Charging forward, Urich closed the distance and commented coldly on the dulled senses brought on by helmets, how even a single misjudgment could be fatal for a warrior. Then, without pause, he delivered death to the man. Djelten, watching his elite troops falter, reeled from disbelief. Melando's side, though inferior on paper, boasted warriors of exceptional caliber. His formation had fully collapsed. He longed not to retreat, to hold the line just a moment longer, but Urich was an unstoppable force, cleaving through every defense and drawing ever closer. Urich pushed through the thinning ranks with relentless speed, eyes locked on the Earl. As he closed in, he hurled his axe with lethal precision, not to kill, but to render Djelten unconscious with a blow from the handle. But fate intervened. The woman who had stood by Djelten threw herself between him and the axe. It struck her squarely in the chest. Staggering, she collapsed. As Djelten turned back, her final breath was spent begging him to flee. Tears streamed down his face as he obeyed her last wish, swearing to avenge her no matter what. Recovering his weapon, Urich clenched his jaw in frustration. His quarry had escaped. When the dust settled and the screams faded, Urich stood alone amidst the carnage. The battlefield was littered with bodies, and crows circled overhead, feasting on the remains. He stared out at the desolation and pondered the fate of the fallen. Did their souls travel to the domain of the sun god Lu to be purified and reborn, or was this the true end, nothingness? Far away within the broken halls of his own territory, Earl Djelten cried out to his god, Ru. He called to the heavens, pleading to know when she would return to him, when she would be reborn and they could be together once more. As Djelten pleaded with the god Ru, his half-brother Garcio interrupted him, urging him to give up on the farmland. It wasn't worth escalating the conflict into something greater. Garcio advised him to send men to negotiate a peace treaty, but Djelten, unmoved, refused. To him, the battle wasn't over, and there was someone he needed to avenge. He turned to his brother and asked for the assistance of the Silver Lion mercenaries. Garcio reminded him that, although he led the Silver Lions, their loyalty was not to him but to money. If Digelton truly desired revenge, he would need to pay them. Digelton explained that the farmland in question wasn't worth hearing the entire Silver Lion company. That was why Digelton had only borrowed 20 mercenaries earlier. It was the appropriate amount of force for the situation. But now, if the goal was vengeance, then hearing the full company wouldn't be a waste. With that, Garcio handed over a chest of gold coins. Digelton again asked for help with his revenge, to which Garcio replied that his brother's vengeance was also his own. He would not accept payment for his share, and would deduct his portion from the cost. Meanwhile, in Melando's territory, his advisors urged him to accept a deal and sell the farmland. They had learned that Silver Lion Garcio was Digelton's half-brother and feared the consequences. If they didn't act fast, they believed they might lose everything. Melando, however, was deeply concerned. If the land grew any smaller, the title of nobility tied to the Melando family could be lost. It was a risk he couldn't afford. A defeat would be devastating, setting them back by decades. The cost of war, combined with possible reparations, could bankrupt the entire land. Still, he reminded himself that Digelton was facing the same risk. At that moment, Urich entered. The Lord was surprised they hadn't fled after hearing about the Silver Lions. Urich asked Bachman whether the Silver Lion mercenaries were truly as formidable as everyone claimed. The Lord, incredulous, was stunned that a mercenary like Urich hadn't heard of them. Urich responded that everyone seemed to be panicking without even laying eyes on the Silver Lions. Bachman explained that, in the mercenary world, reputations were never mistaken. The Silver Lions were indeed formidable. The Lord questioned whether, should he decide to fight, Urich and his group would stand beside him. Urich turned to his companions. Sven, without a moment's pause, showed a clear eagerness to join the battle. Bachman stood resolute, silently affirming that he would follow wherever Urich chose to lead. Donovan, however, voiced his concern. Facing the Silver Lions was ill-advised. They were essentially a standing army. Their experience in large-scale battles was unmatched, and even if the individual skills were similar in larger numbers, the disparity grew exponentially. Urich taunted Donovan, asking if he was the only one backing out. Annoyed, Donovan snapped that those who didn't know when to retreat would die without understanding anything. Bachman reminded him that they had agreed from the start to follow the will of the majority. Donovan bitterly thought to himself how none of these fools seemed afraid, not even of death. Reluctantly, he gave in to the group's decision. It was settled they would join the battle. Elsewhere, soldiers discussed strategy. The surrounding area was wide open, making defense difficult. That was why they were building fences, although it was far from ideal. A defensive battle would be more effective the longer it lasted, but with only a simple stronghold, they were limited. On top of that, the wood supply was short, and construction progress lagged. Urich approached the soldiers with an idea. He suggested an ambush, wait until the battle began, then capture Earl Digelton. The soldiers rejected the plan immediately, saying there was no place nearby to stage such an ambush. Urich insisted otherwise. The locals, certain of the landscape, denied his claim again, but Urich, irritated, pressed on. He led them to what was plainly a shit field, a shallow pit used to gather. If they lay on their stomachs and covered themselves in shit, they could hide there until the right moment. The location was perfect for surprise movement once the fighting began. One of the soldiers admitted that Urich might be right, and added that there was even a saying, better to roll around in a shit field in this world than in the other. Urich then asked his group who was willing to join him in the ambush. With an innocent expression, he promised that the Lord would offer additional compensation. Sven excitedly raised his hand, immediately volunteering. They needed at least 5 people for the ambush. 7 or 8 would be ideal. Donovan stepped forward, then called on his comrades, Lalo, Vajorn, and Giggs, to join him. Though reluctant, they agreed. Donovan explained that, while unpleasant, it was an important role. They couldn't just rely on the conscripted soldiers. Suddenly, a soldier came running toward them. Digelton's army was approaching. The defensive battle had begun. The Digelton army steadily advanced toward the defensive wall. The archers on the wall braced themselves, preparing to intercept the approaching forces. Amid the tension, Bachman sensed the weight of the moment and couldn't help but think that maybe listening to Donovan and making a run for it wouldn't have been the worst idea. Inside the stronghold, a family huddled together in prayer, calling out to Ru for salvation. Observing them, Bachman reflected on the irony. The same sun god they prayed to was the one the Digelton army worshipped as well, and yet here they were, preparing to slaughter each other. The contradiction struck him as darkly amusing. To him, Ru seemed like an incredibly biased god. As the enemy approached, the defenders scrambled to ready themselves for the impending clash. But the wall fell quickly, breached with little resistance. What followed could hardly be described as a defensive battle. Blood spilled freely, and the chaos rendered the term almost laughable. The defending forces were overwhelmed far too easily. The disparity in soldier quality was stark, and the absence of key mercenaries left gaping vulnerabilities. Those elite fighters had not vanished without cause. They were concealed, lying in ambush, though their effectiveness remained to be seen. If something didn't change, it seemed certain they would all be dead before long. Elsewhere in the bleak expanse of the shitfield, Urich waited with the ambush team. Earl de Gelton was visible in the distance, mounted on a horse, flanked by 8 heavily armored guards. Urich quietly readied his bow, nocking an arrow with slow precision. He knew that if the Earl escaped on horseback, all would be lost. He had one chance. Steadying his aim, he released the arrow. It struck true, killing the horse. The Earl fall from the horse. At that moment, Urich and his companions charged forward. As they surged toward their target, Urich caught sight of the Earl and throwed his axe. The weapon flew with lethal intent, but before it could strike, Garcio intercepted it in midair, successfully shielding the Earl. Garcio acknowledged the cleverness of their ambush, nodding that no one would have anticipated their hiding spot. Urich responded with a mocking remark about Garcio's white hair, suggesting he looked like an old man. Garcio, having heard of the presence of skilled mercenaries in the area, deduced that these must be the ones. The larger battle was already nearing its conclusion. Garcio extended an offer, surrender, and they could join the Silver Lion mercenaries. But Urich had no interest in serving under someone weaker than himself. Without further words, they drew swords and began to clash. Urich quickly realized Garcio was no ordinary opponent. Despite that, he pressed forward, knowing that aggression was his only viable path. Garcio, observing Urich's urgency, understood that he was trying to finish the duel before being surrounded. He formulated a strategy. Let his armor absorb an attack to the side while he positioned himself to strike Urich's head. But Urich's blade wasn't ordinary. As it connected, the impact shattered Garcio's defenses. Staggered, Garcio immediately recognized the cause. The blade was made from imperial steel. For a mere mercenary to wield such a weapon raised more questions than answers. He wondered aloud who Urich really was. Urich, sensing his opponent's pain, casually noted that he must have heard bones breaking, and that it likely hurt a great deal. Garcio, despite the pain, clung to a desperate thought. If he could just stall long enough, he might still win. Calling out to his half-brother, he told him not to look back and to keep running. But Urich was already in pursuit. He caught up to the fleeing Earl and seized him, pressing the sword to his neck. The Lord fought back in a frenzy, enraged when he recognized Urich as the man who had slain his lover. But resistance was futile. Urich beat him into submission and demanded that he order the withdrawal of his army. Before any command could be given, the Earl's half-brother acted. Drawing a throwing knife, he aimed with cold precision. In a heartbeat, the blade flew and struck its target, killing his own brother. Then, turning to Urich, he calmly stated his intention. He would accompany him to Earl Milando, and they would agree to a peace treaty. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. It truly means a lot. If this video hits 100 likes, part 2 is coming your way. And if stories of warriors who live and die by the fight speak to you, click now to watch the journey of a gladiator's life in modern society as an MMA fighter, where ancient brutality meets modern combat. I'll see you there. Earl Milando anxiously asked Urich for an update on the situation. Urich reported that Earl Degelton had died and his brother claimed the title. Shocked, Milando learned the brother himself had killed the captured Earl. Milando turned to Garcio, aghast that he committed fratricide. Garcio threatened that his men would continue fighting and plunder Milando's fief. Milando noted the Earl's child, but Garcio planned to marry the widow. Milando realized Garcio must conceal the murder to become the new Earl. Garcio agreed he needed to prevent needless rumors until his position was secure. He offered to give up the disputed land and become good neighbors. Garcio then reached out his hand to seal their new agreement. Urich watched, thinking, these people don't fight for family or brothers. They shook hands, agreeing the Earl died from a horse riding accident. Urich sighed, utterly disillusioned by their treachery and greed. He found their methods of war and politics to be incredibly boring. With the dark deal struck, the tense situation finally began to settle. Garcio suggested they introduce themselves after trying to kill each other. Urich dismissed him, privately wishing he could have killed Garcio. Garcio promised Urich's new reputation would bring him many job offers. But Urich realized Garcio had planned to kill his own brother all along. He pointed out Garcio had told his brother to run, not stay protected. It was as if Garcio was giving him a chance to catch him. Garcio acknowledged Urich's sharp mind, seeing he could become great. But he insisted a barbarian like Urich would never understand his motives. Garcio explained, everyone said an illegitimate child could never become an earl. He found their belief in his decided fate to be completely laughable. With a villainous smile, he declared he returned to overcome that fate. Yurik couldn't understand killing a brother just to become an earl. But as he turned to leave, he had one final warning. He told Garcio to remember his name because their next meeting would be fatal. With his threat delivered, Yurik walked away. Later, Earl Milando toasted the victorious mercenaries at a celebratory feast. While Bachman called the Earl good, Yurik simply found him weak. Bachman clarified that at least this Earl doesn't take more than necessary. Yurik recalled his own past, having fled his home to escape starvation. Meanwhile, a bard sang a heroic, exaggerated tale of their battle. His song celebrated the warriors who faced the Silver Lions without fear. The song hailed Yurik as the barbarian hero who led them all to victory. The legend of Yurik and his warriors was now spreading through song. Later that night, the discussion between Yurik and the Earl turned serious. The Earl had paid bards to spread the song, a gesture Yurik found generous. But the Earl felt it was a small price for what Yurik had accomplished. He then asked if Yurik had any desire for a more stable, settled life. He offered Yurik land of his own, exempt from taxes for a generation. Yurik could build a family and fight for him. The offer was staggering. The thought of owning his own land here was almost unimaginable to him. The incredible proposition felt like being struck by lightning. Yurik asked about his men, but the Earl could only provide for a few. Without hesitation, Yurik politely refused, admitting he never intended to accept. The Earl was confused, thinking a stable life was every mercenary's dream. He couldn't help but ask Yurik for his reason. Yurik looked at the stars, pondering the mysteries of the night sky. He smiled, knowing the world was full of things he didn't understand. And for him, at least, a settled life was not his dream. The next day, Yurik was resting in his quarters. As he slept soundly, his mind drifted elsewhere. He found himself lost within a vivid dream. The dream took him back to his past life as a child. He felt the freedom of jumping through the mountains again. The scene then shifted to a vast, open field. He was standing again in the familiar mountain range. His gaze lifted toward the sky above the peaks. In that moment, he realized the elders had been wrong. He defiantly declared that the old women were completely mistaken about everything. He knew this was the world of the living, a place they couldn't imagine. He saw the other world that existed beyond the mountains for himself. Suddenly, a fiery thought began to consume his mind. Through the haze, he spotted a figure standing before him. The mysterious figure was a person clad entirely in armor. With a shock, he realized he was looking at himself. His armored self was completely engulfed in roaring flames. The terrifying vision left Yurik completely stunned. His armored doppelganger turned with a menacing glare. Just then, a maid gently tried to wake him from the dream. But in that very instant, his nightmare bled into reality. Yurik shot awake, violently grabbing the poor maid's neck. Realizing what he was doing, Yurik quickly came to his senses. He released her, apologizing for his horrible sleeping habits. As the terrified maid fled, he dismissed it as just another dream. Yurik then went to find the other mercenaries. He shouted at the lazy men to stop sleeping and wake up. Since they had eaten their fill, it was time to work. Later that day, the group made their way into town. Donovan was glad to stop camping, and Bachman saw job opportunities. Bachman told him the city was Havirand, a busy commercial hub. Yurik declared they needed to focus on making money immediately. Townspeople whispered about the small group that defeated the Silver Lions. Some men boasted loudly about being part of the famous group. Donovan explained he had them spread the word on purpose. Yurik then asked his men what their next move should be. Bachman noted Yurik's respect for their opinions kept them loyal. Yurik replied that they were all his brothers now. Donovan suggested they gather information and look for mercenary jobs. Bachman took intel duty, assigning Donovan to equipment maintenance. Sven suddenly asked to be excused, as he had somewhere to go. He mentioned that a city like this should have a slave market. Yurik worriedly asked if Sven was thinking of becoming a slave again. Sven clarified he wanted to hire one of his people from the slave market. Hearing this, the others exchanged uncertain glances with each other. Yurik decided to accompany Sven, leaving the other work to Bachman and Donovan. Bachman and Donovan suspected Yurik was just trying to get out of work. Yurik asked Sven's age, but Sven admitted he'd long since lost count. The two continued on their way toward the city's commercial district. Yurik reminded Sven he was the leader, but Sven still saw him as young. As they arrived, Sven noted the slave market was impressively large. Yurik recalled Sven's past, but Sven insisted his spirit was never truly enslaved. His spirit was always heading to the Hill of Swords where Ulgado waits. Yurik told him to keep a sharp eye out as Sven scanned the crowd. Suddenly, his eyes landed on a fellow northerner among the slaves. In their native tongue, Sven offered the man a choice, slavery or freedom. Without hesitation, the slave chose the path to the Hill of Swords. With the decision made, Sven paid the merchant to free his kinsman. As they left, Yurik confirmed the freed man would join their mercenary band. Sven assured him the man, saved from death, would be incredibly loyal. Yurik thoughtfully called out to Sven, his expression serious. He confessed he would have done the same for one of his own brothers. Sven warned Yurik about his hot blood, but Yurik insisted he was patient. Yurik added that one just needs to know when patience isn't required. Sven watched quietly as Yurik walked away. Later, Bachmann announced they had a job directly from the Lord. The news was a significant development. Yurik questioned if the job was truly from the Lord. Bachmann explained they would support forces during a thief subjugation. He stressed that a rich noble's rule meant a great reward. Arik rejected new armor, preferring his comfortable leather. Bachmann confirmed their appointment to meet the Lord tomorrow. Yurik suggested they should celebrate and drink tonight anyway. He then yelled to the whole group that life is short. Yurik declared there was plenty of alcohol for them to drink. The mercenaries roared in approval, ready to celebrate. They walked through a grand, luxurious hallway, a world away from battle. Urich was genuinely impressed, remarking on the castle's fine construction. As he looked around, he thought everything was incredibly cool. Entering further, he found the civilization that built this place truly amazing. And right there, the lord of the castle was waiting for them. Yurik casually took a seat and introduced himself to the lord. The lord acknowledged their recent fame as Yurik's brothers. While eating an apple, Yurik said he heard there was a job. The lord's aide angrily warned the mercenary to watch his manners. Rurik retorted that the glaring aide was the one with no manners. To emphasize his point, Urik threw the apple to the floor. As the guard grabbed his sword, Urik threatened to take his hand. Just as the aide moved, the lord commanded Sir Seaton to stop. Yurik questioned if his casual attitude was truly the problem. He declared his famous identity, known to them even before they called him. Donovan inwardly agreed that a barbarian service proved his immense strength. Donovan felt they should overlook such rudeness if they wanted their help. Barbarians only lost because the Empire had better strategy and monopolized steel. Seemingly unimpressed, Urik turned his back on the Lord. Donovan knew the Lord was the desperate one, not them. The Lord stepped forward, apologizing for Sir Seaton's rude behavior. When Seaton protested, the Lord quickly commanded his silence. He would pay any price to prevent losing even one more soldier. A chastised Seaton immediately offered his apology. The Lord offered 80 million, with a potential bonus up to 100 million. He believed this was a very fair wage for 28 men. Yurik agreed to the terms and began preparing for the upcoming mission. As they departed, the mercenaries celebrated their lucrative new job against the bandits. Yurik noticed an unarmed man and asked Bachmann about his identity. Bachmann explained he was a clergyman, but Urik questioned why a shaman joined them. He detailed his duties, giving blessings and guiding the souls of the dead. Urik guessed he was knowledgeable. Bachmann confirmed that clergymen are like scholars. As Bachmann questioned his curiosity, Yurik simply walked away without an answer. Yurik approached the clergyman, who introduced himself as Godval, recognizing the mercenary captain. Godval thanked Yurik, who noted the young clergyman's surprisingly respected status. Yurik asked why he was thankful. Godval said it was for fighting the bandits. Yurik brushed off the thanks, reminding him it was only a paid job. But Godval insisted that risking one's life is noble, regardless of payment. Yurik called the clergyman a nut job, forcing Bachmann to apologize for him. But Godval wasn't offended, understanding that their customs were just different. Yurik was completely bewildered by the man's unexpected kindness. The monk simply held a warm, friendly smile. Later, Yurik asked Bachman if all clergymen were really like him. Bachman warned him not to anger them, but Yurik just compared them to shamans. Bachman insisted Yurik didn't understand, which Yurik took as an insult. As they bickered, Stian announced they would camp for the night. Meanwhile, other mercenaries argued about boiling a leather glove in their stew. While mercenaries shouted threats, a bored Yurik was lying down and yawning. Yurik addressed the clergyman, who then introduced himself as Gottval. He noticed the bread in Gottval's hand, which was his entire dinner. Ulrich tried taking a bite but discovered the bread was incredibly hard. He joked that Gottval must have some seriously tough teeth to eat it. Gottval explained the bread teaches patience, meant to be dissolved slowly. Ulrich found it tasteless, but Gottval said delicious food harms the soul. Ulrich wondered if this difficult lifestyle was typical for a clergyman. Gottval explained their mission, to guide souls by rejecting worldly pleasures. He firmly believed a fallen soul could never truly guide another. Changing the subject, Ulrich asked if Gottval could read. He could. Ulrich asked for writing lessons, surprising Gottval with what he already knew. Ulrich expressed his admiration for letters, which preserve knowledge across time and space. He believed written words were a truthful and unchanging way to pass down history. Gottval was amazed. A barbarian understood the true value of written language. He was impressed that a barbarian had managed to learn so much already. His eyes twinkled, thrilled to find someone with a genuine desire to learn. Gottval eagerly offered to teach Ulrich after every meal, believing it was fate. Ulrich was completely bewildered by Gottval's sudden and intense excitement. Sometime later, Ulrich went to visit Gottval's tent. He entered the tent and called out to Gottval, but he was shocked to find Donovan kneeling inside. Ulrich stared in disbelief, questioning what Donovan was doing. Gottval asked him to return later, as Donovan was confessing. The word confessions caught Ulrich completely by surprise. Ulrich thought about confessing sins to cleanse a soul. He couldn't understand what the point of it was. Just then, he saw Donovan leaving the confession room. Donovan warned Ulrich not to bother Monk Gottval too much. Inside, Ulrich questioned the clergy's status. Gottval said people fear the afterlife. Gottval explained that a lost path after death is the ultimate terror. Ulrich mentioned the Northerners' belief in going to the Hill of Swords, but Gottval called it a hell for those with karma, not a paradise. Sadly, he called the Northerners' god violent, arrogant, and unloving. In contrast, he said the sun god, Ru, loves all life. Ulrich wondered if a god really needs to love their people. Gottval insisted that gods love their people, just like parents love children. Ulrich put his arm around Gottval, acknowledging his good words. He wondered why they had to bleed if Ru's love was so great. Gottval blamed original sin, but Ulrich angrily called it nonsense. Grabbing Gottval, Ulrich accused all clergymen and shamans of being liars. Annoyed, he insisted the world beyond the mountains was just another lie. Gottval loudly protested, insisting that he did not lie to him. Ulrich changed topics, asking what Gottval and Donovan discussed earlier. Gottval explained confessions are for Ru, and that he would keep them secret. Ulrich quietly considered Gottval's secretive reply. A tense silence fell between the two men. Gottval broke the silence, speaking Ulrich's name. Ulrich muttered that this was a civilized society. He then demanded the clergyman teach him about civilization, and so, their lessons began that very night. Gottval was amazed by Ulrich's exceptional memory and rapid learning. Gottval asked who taught him before, and Ulrich named Horus. Ulrich explained Horus was a gladiator middleman who taught him. Gottval asked about Horus. Ulrich simply said he had died. Ulrich recalled Horus dying from an arrow mid-lesson. Gottval expressed his sorrow. To Gottval's surprise, Ulrich said he killed all the ambushers. Gottval guessed Ulrich was from the south, but Ulrich remained evasive. Just then, Ulrich's sharp eyes noticed something. His senses screamed, picking up a hidden threat in the darkness. Suddenly, an arrow shot out from the shadows. Ulrich shielded Gottval, letting the arrow pierce his own hand. Without flinching, he ripped the arrow from his flesh. The mercenaries yelled for everyone to wake up, shouting about an ambush. Yurik told the clergyman to get down and hide behind him. He smeared blood on his face, refusing to lose another teacher. With fierce resolve, Yurik grabbed his sword, ready to fight. Meanwhile, Godval retreated to his tent to pray for safety. But Yurik quickly noticed the attackers had already fled. He realized it was just a frustrating hit-and-run tactic. Soldiers rushed over, warning him that the area was still dangerous. Yurik simply told them that the attackers were already gone. He examined the tracks, noting it was a small ambush group. Yurik questioned what the sentries were doing during such a predictable attack. A mercenary stepped forward, telling Yurik that he saw what happened. He angrily accused the sentries of being too distracted to do their jobs. Seeing his fallen comrade, Giggs, Yurik demanded to know who was responsible. Without hesitation, Bjorn pointed out the guilty soldier. The accused soldier was frozen with fear. In a flash of rage, Yurik landed a powerful punch. His fury was not satisfied, and he continued his assault. The air was thick with grief and brutal retribution. Stian rushed in, demanding to know what was happening. He ordered the mercenary leader to release his soldier immediately. Yurik explained their lazy watch caused his brother's deaths. Stian was deeply annoyed by the defiant barbarian. He threatened Yurik's life if he ever touched his soldiers again. Bachman stepped in, telling Yurik that it was enough. Yurik prayed for the sinful soul, asking for mercy on its return. He watched the clergyman's prayer with intense focus. Donovan was relieved that Giggs had a clergyman to guide him. He then told Yurik that he owed him for defending Giggs. Yurik replied he would grieve and rage for any of his brothers. He continued to observe the scene with great intensity. Yurik lamented that he was unable to see souls with his own eyes. He wondered if clergymen and shamans possessed the ability to see them. After some time had passed, the ceremony concluded. Godval approached Yurik, asking about the condition of his hand. Yurik assured him it was fine, as Godval expressed his gratitude. Yurik said they just help each other. Godval called it ruse teaching. Yurik found this ironic, feeling he was far from mercy and love. Yurik asked about his brother. Godval assured him Giggs was with Rue. Standing up, Yurik told the clergyman he had a question for him. He confessed his disbelief in either soul or the Northerners' god. Yurik believed that no afterlife existed for him anywhere. He then questioned where his own soul would go after he died. He wondered about the souls of his ancestors and his brothers. Finally, he asked where his own soul was ultimately destined to go. Godval's expression turned sad upon hearing Yurik's questions. He warned Yurik would become a wandering spirit, forgetting his true self. After his grim words, Godval fell into a deep, somber silence. Yurik, processing the dark revelation, also remained completely silent. He stood there, lost in deep and thoughtful contemplation. Yurik sat before a crackling bonfire, lost in his thoughts. He watched the flickering flames, his gaze fixed and careful. His mind continued to wrestle with his deep and heavy thoughts. His gaze then shifted towards the darkness of the deep forest. There, evil spirits blamed him for their lost resting ground. They accused him of discovering the living world, a grave sin. They screamed he destroyed their peace and would soon join them. Then, with a jolt, Yurik woke up from the terrifying dream. He was breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. A wave of pure anxiety washed over him completely. He grabbed his sword, thinking the dream was a stupid mistake. The haunting images of the evil spirits lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling of dread they left behind. Unable to sleep, Yurik sat alone in the quiet night. He just hoped for the safety of daylight to arrive soon. Mercenaries searched the hostile forest, needing to find the hideout before night. Stian dismissed the threat, noting there were only about 30 bandits. Yurik warned that underestimating their mountain skills could be fatal for them. Stan disliked his pessimism, but Yurik insisted he was being completely serious. Yurik explained he followed their tracks, but they had mysteriously vanished. As an experienced hunter, Yurik knew they expertly used the environment to hide. Stian considered Yurik's words about their knowledge of the terrain. He still believed their superior numbers could easily surround the bandits. Yurik suspected a skilled barbarian or hunter was leading the bandits. Donovan agreed, emphasizing they must locate the hideout before making any moves. Donovan warned against splitting up, fearing they would get taken out one by one. Yurik volunteered to find the hideout with their fastest soldiers, preferably former hunters. Stian questioned his confidence. Yurik admitted he couldn't find tracks that had vanished. He believed the bandits, thrilled by their ambush, would surely strike them again. That day, the soldiers and mercenaries were preparing for what was to come. As Yurik maintained his axe, someone approached him from behind. The man mentioned that everyone was now scared of Yurik after yesterday. He asked if they'd be ambushed again. Yurik noted their enemies were good climbers. Yurik believed they were confident they wouldn't be caught even if they failed. He was certain they would attack again, as he would do the same. Yurik insisted on his name. The man introduced himself as Jezba. With their discussion finished, the entire group finally departed. Yurik decided they should wait there to observe the thieves' movements. Jezba shared that he was once a hunter, doing it to survive. A moment of quiet understanding passed between the two men. Yurik urged him to continue, since they were just waiting for an ambush. Jezba lamented how his income fell due to increased fur imports. Yurik grew curious, asking why the fur and leather imports increased. Jezba explained that the barbarians became more civilized after the war. New contracts with merchants increased the supply, which Yurik acknowledged. Unemployed, Jezba joined Javiron's security team to provide for his family. As Jezba mentioned his third child, Yurik suddenly silenced him. Startled, Jezba looked around, nervously asking if enemies were present. Yurik whispered that, from experience, talking about family brings death. Jezba realized his prejudice was wrong. They actually got along well. Suddenly, shouts came from the camp as soldiers spotted the attackers. Hearing the commotion, Yurik and the others prepared for the fight. With a call to his friends, Yurik led the charge. They moved with purpose, determined to catch their targets. The group plunged deep into the forest, following the bandits' trail. Yurik realized these thieves had surprisingly impressive stamina. He decided to go ahead, leaving a trail for the others. Yurik moved swiftly through the trees, closing the distance. Even Jezba, a skilled climber, was amazed by his agility. He was like a beast, no different from a wolf. Yurik paused, noting their stamina rivaled that of tribe warriors. He grew suspicious about who these people really were. Their endurance was unusual. They were not average thieves. He knew he could have caught them if he were alone. Suddenly, Yurik sensed he was no longer the hunter. An attack came from behind, but Yurik dodged the blade. A bandit praised him for the quick reaction. Yurik noted the bandit's skill, who admitted he felt watched. The two warriors faced each other, preparing for the inevitable clash. Yurik knew this fight had to end quickly before more enemies arrived. He figured the thieves' den had to be somewhere nearby. Without another moment's hesitation, Yurik and the bandit finally clashed. It was immediately clear that both fighters were incredibly skillful. The bandit spun, putting all his momentum into a powerful attack. But in that instant, Yurik noticed a distinctive snake tattoo. Seeing the mark, his entire focus sharpened in an instant. He unleashed a devastating blow, stunning the bandit with his impossible strength. With a final, decisive swing, Yurik's axe cut through the bandit's throat. The bandit collapsed to the ground as his life quickly faded away. Grabbing his hair, Yurik acknowledged that he was simply the stronger one. He then looked down at his axe, thinking it had become dull. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out. Jezba had finally caught up. Soldiers stared at the gruesome scene, taking in what had happened. They recognized the tattoo, wondering if it was from the Snake Church. Jezba identified him as a southern barbarian as Yurik questioned the Snake Church. Soldiers explained they're a heretical cult that sacrifices children in the south. They are filthy outcasts, treated poorly even among other southern barbarians. Suddenly, an arrow flew out and struck the soldier down mid-sentence. Yurik yelled to sound the horn, telling Jezba to wait for reinforcements. Amidst the sudden chaos of the attack, Yurik quickly reached out. A volley of arrows rained down, and unfortunately, Jezba was hit. All around them, soldiers collapsed under the relentless barrage of arrows. Yurik surveyed the devastating scene, taking in the sudden carnage around him. He sighed heavily, telling the injured Jezba that he had warned him. His attention then snapped back as he realized the immediate danger. Surrounded by bandits, he thought discussing family before a battle brings death. Uruk found himself completely surrounded by the bandits. He quickly counted them. There were about 20. Despite the impossible odds, Uruk prepared himself for battle. He then gathered his strength and let out a powerful roar. He hoped the shout would alert the nearby subjugation force. But now, he had to survive on his own. The grim thought that he could die here consumed him. He dared them to attack, ready to behead the first one. The bandits exchanged worried glances, hesitating for a moment. He knew everything but time was against him in this fight. Spouting words about eternity, the bandits finally charged at him. Uruk gripped his two axes, preparing for the inevitable clash. He wondered if he would become an evil spirit if he died here. He began to move, skillfully dodging and evading the bandits' attacks. The bandits realized he knew how to expertly fight in the forest. One bandit realized this and ordered the others to surround him. He warned that attacking one by one was a death sentence for them all. Uruk noted that the snake-tattooed men were finally using their heads. He recognized their experienced movements. They were strong warriors. Despite their strength, he suddenly turned and began to run away. He seemed to be talking to himself, urging a return to the fight. He knew they had nowhere to go, only wandering this world. For a moment, he questioned if he was going insane. With his conflict resolved, he suddenly leaped into the air. He landed silently on a high tree branch above them. From his new vantage point, he positioned himself to strike. He then dove directly into the horde of bandits below. Uruk landed right in the middle of the enemy group. His attack was swift, slaughtering the surprised bandits around him. The remaining bandits responded with a sudden volley of arrows. He cried out in pain as several of the arrows hit him. Ignoring the pain, Uruk focused, preparing for his next move. He charged forward, running directly at his enemies. He threw his axe with deadly precision, taking them down. Uruk's relentless assault continued without pause. A bandit noticed a critical opening in Uruk's defense. Seizing the chance, the bandit lunged forward to attack. But Uruk instantly noticed the incoming attacker. With incredible speed, he reacted to the threat. He spun around, directly facing his surprised foe. The bandit was stunned by his impossible reaction speed. Uruk immediately struck the bandit with immense force. Despite his skill, an arrow suddenly pierced his side. He avoided a fatal blow, but his leg was deeply cut. Until now, he had managed to pick them off one by one. But with his mobility gone, the numbers were overwhelming. The bandits argued, some confident, others wary of the monster. Uruk wondered if he was truly afraid of death in this moment. Despite his thoughts, he felt his hand begin to tremble. He quickly realized he wasn't afraid of death at all. With a chilling resolve, Uruk licked the blood from his hand. He charged, his mind filled with images of a golden wheat field. He defended against attacks, thinking of burning land and the vast sea. Lost in the moment, he continued the relentless slaughter. In the chaos, he felt as if he were at the world's edge. Suddenly, approaching soldiers spotted the commotion from a distance. Bachman and his soldiers rushed in, calling out Uruk's name in surprise. He found Uruk kneeling among the dead, asking if he was alive. His strength finally spent, Uruk collapsed to the ground. Looking at the aftermath, Bachman let out a heavy sigh. Drenched in blood, Uruk was certain he was on the verge of death.